Secretary for Beyond Club campaign at Sierra Club for the Midwest region. Precious finds deep meaning in engaging individuals in conversations surrounding bias, bigotry, and prejudice in their community on the basis and belief that humans can coexist with one another positively through the embracing of each other's differences and celebrating of each other's human diversity. With over 15 years of diversity training, leadership development, and social justice education experience, Precious is a highly demanded speaker and has had the honor of being invited to the White House LGBTQ pride reception to meet the Obamas, curated the season opener of Transmetropolitan Transgender Resilient for Out at the Chicago History Museum, collaborated with Miley Cyrus' Happy Hippie Foundation and Instagram to support identity LGBTQ youth homelessness. And I would like to add that Precious is one of those rare people who uses diversity, the adversity that life tosses at all of us to envision and to create unity, and to create the world that we all want to live in. Please give a warm welcome to Precious Davis.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Such an honor to be here with you this afternoon. Anytime you get a call from Mona Noriega to speak at an event, the only thing that you say is yes. So it's an honor to be here with so many familiar faces and people I've labored with in the work and community. I often find myself speaking to crowds that I don't know. So this feels really important and really special to be here. Today, as many of you do every day, we have cast a bright light into the deep darkness of hatred, unfurling all around us, which is not new at all. This feeling, which is increasingly resonant, alarming, and unrestrained as of late. Bay Area man arrested for threatening to shoot woman for being Muslim. Noose found in the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Man arrested in connection with the murder of a transgender woman. State of emergency declared in Charlottesville as violence erupts at white nationalist rally. These are just a few of the headlines reflective of the 1,064 incidents of hate-fueled attacks and acts of intimidation that have been cataloged by the Southern Poverty Law Center just since the election of number 45, whose name I will not speak and give cover to. According to the Southern Poverty Law Center's annual census of extremist groups, the number of hate groups in the United States rose for a second year in a row in 2016. Last year in Chicago, we watched as reports of hate crimes surpassed previous year's records. A disproportionate number of these hate crimes were classified as anti-LGBTQ and anti-Black. Since the election, not only have we seen a national swell in reports of racism, misogyny, ableism, xenophobia, Islamophobia, homophobia, transphobia, anti-Semitism, and anti-immigrant sentiment, but we continue to see the ways in which the views that promote the hatred are buffered by hate and bigoted language on the part of our so-called leaders. We have seen efforts being made to uphold and pass discriminatory laws and bills. In Texas, for example, despite multiple courts citing the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund, they were unsuccessful in attempting to strike down voter ID laws, which have been shown to intentionally discriminate against and disproportionate against Black and Latino voters. In July, many of us woke up to this tweet. After conclusion with my generals and military experts, please be advised that the United States government will not accept or allow transgender individuals to serve in any capacity in the U.S. military. When a government attempts to uphold and enact legislation that does not provide an increase, but rather seeks to take away rights, often from those who are already unprotected, they send a very clear message about whose life is valuable and about whose rights are worthy of being upheld and protected. When police officers can kill unarmed black folks without a resource, when a documented racist is appointed at the United States Attorney General, when the president mocks a reporter who suffers from a joint condition, when he refers to undocumented Mexican immigrants as rapists, when he is more concerned with who is standing for the national anthem than he is for the lives of millions of Puerto Rico citizens. This makes no sense. This contributes directly and gives permission to the perpetrators of hate and those who feel violence and threats that are carried out each day. Many of you know the statistics better than I do. We all know that on the individual and institutional level, horrors faced every day by those of us within the historically marginalized communities. I don't need to recount to you the details of violence by hatred and bias that is experienced by those of us who work so hard to navigate such a brutal world day in and day out. I don't need to remind you of the added insult of having to fight for too often a hard justice in the face of such pervasive and often state-sponsored violence. It is vital, though, that we continue to name and document and bring attention to what is happening, that we create spaces like this to address the hateful violence and the continual violence in the form of an inadequate response. In addition to calling attention to the victims, survivors, and perpetrators of hate crimes, it is also important that we turn our attention to prevention efforts, to solutions, that we each ask, what is it that each of us can do to see these numbers and statistics that they do not continue to grow? That we can build a world wherein we're able to celebrate and honor and uplift the incredible richness of our diversity and not be punished with violence or threats because of it. I wake up many mornings and I feel a deep sense of sadness. I feel a lump in my throat every time I log on to social media or I turn on the news, a new dread that comes from the fear underlying what's next? What now? I talk to my colleagues at Sierra Club. I talk to my friends and peers about what we can do to ensure that we are able to continue and sustain our work in the light of so much devastation and injustice. I want to name that these are times of enormous suffering and that many of us are tired and burned out and full of righteous anger. I also want to name that we are still here, that we're still fighting. It helps me to remember that for every person who would seek to harm me, there are 100 more who will protect and defend. It helps me to remember that in spite of the ways that much of the media and many others seek to divide us, we are all in this together. It helps me to remember my pain and your pain are not separate. It helps me to see the countless ways in which hate is being shut down every day. We must continually ask, what can we do to ensure that in all of the different ways in which we are able, that we can spread the wisdom of Aboriginal activist Lila Watson, who addressed the need for intersectional and collective efforts toward freedom by reminding us that our liberation is bound together. As a Black transgender woman, I know firsthand the impact of racism, of transphobia, of misogyny. I know the statistic that the average life expectancy for a trans woman of color is 35, and this has everything to do with the intolerance that fuels hate, which leads to violence. I know firsthand the impact of holding multiple marginalized identities and having to fight not only for my survival, but for my rightful place at the table. I know what it is to be made feel as less than. And And I also know if it were not for the countless people who have stood up for me, with me, my sisters, my brothers, those in between, and my chosen kin, that I would not most certainly be standing here today. If it had not been for the tireless work of so many who refused to stand down, those who refused to accept that the lies that we are fed about the world, that we could be something, that we could achieve our destiny, I couldn't help but join the fight so hard for our rights to protect the dignity and the worth of all of us. I commend you all for being a part of that vast throng of advocates and allies and co-conspirators who are doing the work of calling out hate and calling in love. Even when it feels hopeless, even when it seems like there is no way and there could not be a possible win, it's important that we identify and celebrate the incredible efforts being made by so many groups and so many individuals who are working tirelessly to prevent and respond to hate crimes, to seek justice for those who have suffered and made to feel like their lives, like our lives, are somehow disposable and do not matter. In spite of the countless acts of violence, there are people all over the city, all over the country, and all over the world who have made it their life's work to ensure that the well-being and full expression of our humanity are safeguarded and protected. An interviewer once asked the brilliant writer and activist James Baldwin if he was in despair about the world. Baldwin replied, "I have never been in despair about the world. I've been enraged by it. I can't afford despair. You can't tell the children there's no hope." Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with this quote. It's one that I turn often to these days. It's one that I remember when I look into the eyes of my nieces and nephews, when I take into the reality of the enormous hatred and suffering that they've been born into. The Witness Media Lab's 2016 project Capturing Hate studied viewer engagement with eyewitness videos that show transphobic violence has been filmed, shared, and engaged with as entertainment. Videos of those encounters are not only shocking in their quantity, but in popularity among viewers and the callousness of their responses. Homophobic, transphobic, and racist remarks dominate the comments and videos posted over a decade ago and are still being engaged with. 329 videos of physical assaults viewed over 89 million times and liked over 500,000 times. That these videos were captured, shared, and engaged with as entertainment indicates a real and imminent threat. And it is further evidence of the lack of responsibility that so many people take. The switch to have empathy, it seems to shut off when we're witnessing violence. My brilliant sister and hate crime survivor turned activist Cece McDonald once said, "We can't talk about radical action without talking about love, without loving each other. A radical movement is giving to your community. It's not enough to be an ally. You have to be willing to ask yourself, how much am I willing to give?" A lot of people claim to be an ally, but they walk away from the police arrest when they see them harassing trans women of color. They walk away and say, "I didn't know how to handle that situation," but they aren't thinking about the people who merely don't have a choice. Not everyone has the opportunity to politely walk away or excuse themselves from situations of oppression. And really, none of us can afford to walk away. No matter how far removed or unafflicted we feel about any particular incidents of hatred or violence, we cannot turn a blind eye to the abuses that disproportionately impact historically marginalized individuals and communities. We cannot continue to think that if it doesn't affect us all, that we don't have any responsibility to act. The violence and indignities hurled at us throughout the centuries are too many to count. But with every act of violence committed, with every threat made, there are even more people who have and who are creating spaces of healing, lifting their voices to speak out against injustice, working hard to ensure that we move even closer to a world where love prevails. We must stand up together against hatred and violence in any form, whether it comes from a parent, a neighbor, a coworker, a stranger, a police officer, or a president. In spite of the pain that persists, we have it within us to turn the tide. I know that we have the power to create a world where we prioritize love. The Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "Returning hate for hate multiplies hate, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of a star." Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. What is important to add, to name, is the form of love which conquers hate. It's a verb. It's active. It requires us not to be bystanders. It requires us to push ourselves, to do the hard work of continually coming together and building bridges and outpouring the act of compassion. We cannot afford to love passively or abstractly. We must take whatever pieces of power or privilege or joy that we have within us and find ways to radiate that outwardly, to share, to join hands, and to build a network, a power grid of interconnection. Because it is imperative that we put feeling into action every single day. Some of us will be the dreamers, helping to crystallize our collective vision for the new world we seek and manifest. And some of us will be the doers, taking steps to put those plans into operation. But all of us, no matter what context we find ourselves in, must be beers. We are human beings. The way we choose to be and exist, the wavelength we radiate, the electricity we share, the mental state of liberation we embody. This is a powerful form of activism. Living your truth, living authentically, sharing that spark, that is something we can all be and in support of with each other right now. Audre Lorde once said, "When I dare to be powerful, to use my strength in the service of my vision, then it becomes less and less important whether I am afraid." It is not our differences that divide us. It is our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences. Your silence will not protect you. If I didn't define myself for myself, I would be crunched into other people's fantasies for me and be eaten alive. For the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. I am deliberate and afraid of nothing. When we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard or welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid. So it is better to speak. Revolution is not a one-time event. Our vision begins with our desires. Thank you.
they almost made me start crying. Okay, so thank you again, Precious. Again, I thank you all for being here. I thank you for doing the work. We have so much work ahead of us. There were so many little pithy things that you said that I can't even begin to repeat them all, but they are going to help motivate me because I'm going to have this thing right here. I'm going to have that. I'm looking at that. And this will help motivate me for my continued work, and I hope it helps motivate you for your continued work. So thank you.